Our topic today is the IRS collection machine and how you relate to it. You know, the IRS has only one job, and that's to collect money from you, and it's programmed to do just that. So here's the key: act now to stop the IRS collection machine from rolling over you. It's as simple as that. You know that IRS computers work during the day and the night, over weekends and on holidays. Yes, we've even seen the IRS issue levies on national holidays. The point is, the computers just keep churning away. Additional tax, penalties, and interest get added already and automatically by the software. And as you will see, the IRS computers will keep doing this even if it's wrong. Unfortunately, the vast majority of Americans are completely overwhelmed by that IRS machine. They expect bad news from the IRS. They expect it's going to continue to pressure them, even if they believe that it's wrong, unfair, or just blatantly illegal. Some say all of that is the result of the reputation the IRS has carefully cultivated over the decades. Personally, I believe it results from the systematic and intentional failure to educate regular Americans about their legal rights and the ease by which they are used and exercised. A digital tax attorney was created precisely to fill that void. It's the child of necessity, the result of the fact that basic taxpayer rights are not taught to us in high school. And believe it or not, they're not even taught in many college business and financial programs. What is important now is to recognize that every taxpayer who's on the receiving end of IRS collections has rights. That means everyone. And that's why Digital Tax Attorney is so critical, so vital. It succeeds because it fills that void of taxpayer lack of knowledge. Plus, it does so in an affordable and easy to follow manner. What it does is truly industry revolutionary. And we do it by making ourselves available to you so that you can consult with us. We are tax controversy attorneys. Consult with us. Learn from our decades of continued success in resolving serious tax problems for taxpayers in distress. Now, once you accept that truth, you can step forward and you can tell the IRS why its demands are wrong and what the proper resolution would be. Certainly, you know you can't trust the IRS to identify and exercise your rights for you in your best interests. I mean, that's crazy. If you don't do this for yourself, the IRS collection machine will take advantage of your lack of action. And here's some of the things that it's programmed to automatically accomplish. 1, it hands out penalties like it's candy, and it does it automatically. In 2012, for instance, the IRS reports that it assessed about $27 billion in penalties against taxpayers. To give you a better idea how much money that is, how much $27 billion is, understand that it would make 27,000 people millionaires. But that was just for 2012 alone. Heck, the IRS does this year after year. In 2011, for instance, it assessed penalties in the amount of $30,921 million. In 2010, it assessed penalties of $28,055 million. And in 2009, it assessed penalties of 29,820,000,000. Now, understand, for instance, in the asbestos litigation, $30 billion has been set aside for all the folks that have been injured. And yet, isn't that amazing? That's how much the IRS penalizes people every single year. And many people have penalties assessed year after year. And then interest is charged on those penalties too. Now, recognize that billions of dollars in penalties assessed by the IRS are wrong. And please recognize and stop that video and let that sink in if you need to. Few people understand that you can challenge these penalties and that federal law gives you that right. So please think about that and accept it. For instance, in 2012, the IRS had to remove $16 billion in improper penalties. The point is, even more penalties would be removed if they were challenged. So, investigate the penalties assessed against you. Don't assume that they're proper, and don't risk paying something that you shouldn't. Why would you risk paying improper penalties if you are already on a tight budget? If you already have money troubles, or when you need that money for your family and your kids? If you do, you must take the steps to get the penalties and that related interest removed, because the hurt and distress that's caused by IRS penalties is huge. And then when that happens, many people end up taking money from other basic living expense needs to pay the IRS, and they and their families either go without or go further in debt. Secondly, how many of you are penalized yearly? Now, the IRS has stated that at any given time, somewhere between 6 million and 12 million of you have IRS problems. But that answer really doesn't matter if you're one of those folks that have been penalized, because once you're penalized, it becomes personal. At that point, the real question is, what are you going to do to try to correct it and stop it? And that's the key. Otherwise, the machine's going to continue to roll over you. If you don't, those penalties and the interest that are added to your original tax debt makes your delinquency explode. Stated in another way, even if you owe the tax, by not challenging the penalties, when you can, you are either doing a number of different things. One, you're gambling that the IRS will not act to collect on the demand and that the debt will be wiped out after the statute of limitations expires. In other words, we refer to that as trying to write it out. Or two, you're gambling that you will earn or inherit or win a very large sum of money in the future to cover the debt. Now, we refer to that as prospecting. Or three, you are willing to accept the responsibility to pay the original demand plus all the additional penalties and interest whenever the IRS collection machine pushes you hard for payment. Now, that's a rare event, but many people make that decision by not acting. Many people, by not acting, simply accept the burden that the IRS is continuing going to escalate and lay on their shoulders. Some people consider that as a business decision, but obviously it has problems. For you can do nothing because you're debilitated by the tax problem. I mean, that's how most people end up doing nothing. Unfortunately, the result is very negative because the debt continues to grow, and at some time the IRS will compel you to have to pay attention to it and to try to seek a resolution. And we know what that feeling is like, and that's why we have the intro on IRS Meltdown. At some point, a debt, a delinquency to the IRS, because of the penalties and the interest, can actually exceed your wildest expectation of creating income or being able to pay it. That is an extraordinarily destructive situation. And many people find themselves precisely in that position. Keep in mind, penalties and interest continue as time go on. Now make no mistake, additional penalties and interests continue automatically, and they'll continue as long as the law permits it to happen. And generally, the IRS can allow the matter to remain idle for years. In other words, it doesn't have to take any active steps to forcibly collect that debt from you. But in the meantime, it's okay because it's still getting larger. Though there are some situations where interest can be removed where IRS fault exists, the general rule relating to collections is that the IRS delay in attempting to get paid does not stop penalties and interest from continually being added to your delinquency. In other words, you don't get relief because the IRS didn't act quickly enough. It's up to you to act. It's up to you to act. So the penalties must be challenged in order for you to have them removed. So imagine how much money is currently being collected by the collection machine that should not be. If the penalties weren't correct from the beginning, don't pay them. I mean, that's in the taxpayer's Bill of Rights. Yet the system is programmed otherwise, and the hurt and the distress that's caused by IRS penalties is overwhelming. Yes, it's overwhelming even to folks that have IRS delinquencies of $15,000 or less, because the amount that's owed is critical money that's needed for other purposes. It's not immediately paid out of discretionary income. The IRS collection machine forces people into what we have long called the cycle of destruction. Now, you can be overwhelmed by your IRS delinquency, but whatever you do, don't allow that to force you not to pay the taxes that are due from you now or to file the returns that are due from you in this period. If you don't do either one of those or both of those, you're entering the cycle of destruction. And this is the common result that occurs from the pressures and the burdens that are brought to bear upon people by the IRS. The collection machine causes this to happen. It's why millions of taxpayers can't ever break free of their IRS problems. When you add more tax problems onto the problems that you already have, you're compounding the total. A new statute of limitations time period begins to run on your new delinquency, and it means that the period of time that you're going to be forced to live with those burdens, which is the sum of all your IRS delinquencies, gets extended further in time. You follow that? So you have to get current and stay current. You have to be diligent about it. The IRS grinds away in other fashions too. You know that last year the collection machine issued more than 3 million levies against wages and bank accounts. That means more than 3 million employers, banks, business contractors, and any number of other targets receive levies from the IRS trying to collect delinquencies owed by taxpayers. Now imagine the stress, the catastrophic stress that goes with each levy, and recognize that the IRS has been issuing about 3 million levies each year for the last 5 years. Now, once the levy issued, if you do nothing, especially on paychecks, that levy is going to continue and apply to each paycheck until the delinquency that's listed on the face of the levy is paid in full. Now you know why taxpayers fall into the cycle of destruction. Now, IRS levies are issued against banks, investment and retirement accounts, and they drain the funds that are intended to cover checks that have already been written and bills that you know you're going to have to pay. Now, the IRS will even levy if there are laws and facts and circumstances that should prevent it from doing so. For the most part, it issues levies automatically through an organization that was created and remains dedicated to accomplishing just that. That organization, if you will, is called the Automated Collection Service. Now, the key to stopping the IRS is to know your rights and to assert them. And that's particularly true when you are targeted or your funds are targeted by IRS levies. You can do that either before or after the IRS levies. All you have to do is know your rights and to exercise them. Also, each year the IRS files liens against millions of taxpayers and their property. For instance, last year the IRS issued almost 1 million federal tax liens against taxpayer assets. And still, that says nothing about the millions and millions of other liens that the IRS had already issued in the past and which still remain outstanding. Now, those liens can tie up your property, they can prevent you from obtaining credit, they can force you into paying higher interest rates. They divert money that you would receive from the property at the time that it's sold over to the IRS. And, you know, these liens can remain in place for years. And even though the IRS is not actively trying to collect the delinquency from you, those liens still stay in effect for all the while the statute of limitations continues to run. And then if that's the case, the lien's still in effect and you try to sell your property and you owe more because that debt has continued to increase than the equity that you have in your property, guess what happens to that equity? That's right, it gets paid to the IRS. Now, another example of the collection machine being in gear to your disadvantage is when the IRS files substitute income tax returns for taxpayers. Last year alone, hundreds of thousands of substitute income tax returns were filed by the IRS for taxpayers. And this has been done every single year for who knows how many years in the past. Now, do you think those returns favor the taxpayer? Do you think that those returns take into account your personal deductions, your tax credits, or any other information that would lend itself to helping you accurately determine the proper amount of tax that's due from you and that should be paid by you? Now, the end result is that many of those substitute returns reflect taxes that could be 10 times higher than what they should be. And then, by the way, not only does that tax enter into the realm of delinquency, but then the IRS engages the collection machine to collect it from you. And it won't stop until you stop it. That amount that it demands will remain of record until you say no. Now, I've been talking about liens, I've been talking about levies, I've been talking about active enforcement actions. But can you imagine the tens of millions of letters the IRS sends to taxpayers every single year that includes a threat that the liens or the levies will be filed. The threat. Tens of millions and tens of millions of other people are impacted by those IRS threats. Those statistics simply do not take into account all the people and families that are adversely impacted. That group includes spouses, parents, and children, and the coercive powers of the collection machine obviously impacts a group of people that far exceed my ability to estimate. Is it 50 million, 60 million? I don't know. What I do know is that it's important if it's happening to you, to your family, or to somebody close to you. Now, federal Congress has enacted what's referred to as the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. And it's intended to keep the collection machine in check. But the Taxpayer Bill of Rights means nothing unless you know what it means. It means nothing unless you exercise those rights. I mean, when was the last time that you talked to the IRS and somebody representing the IRS told you what your rights were and how to go about exercising them? Told you that they were concerned, that the IRS was concerned, that the demands that it was putting on you were not possibly proper. It may have been overinflated. I mean, the majority of you can't say yes to that. You can't say that you know of circumstances like that. And even if you do, can you honestly answer that you believe that the IRS does all that it can in order to identify all your rights and to make sure that they are exercised in your best interests? Of course not. The collection machine is devoted to collecting money, your money. And if you understand that, then you also see the inherent conflict of interests between collecting money, your money, and identifying and exercising your rights as a taxpayer in your best interests to the full extent available. As a consequence, the end punchline is that you must act for yourself, and that void has now been filled by Digital Tax Attorney. Not just with the videos and the sets that are specifically devoted to challenges commonly experienced by millions of taxpayers just like you, but by making ourselves available so that you can consult with us about your IRS tax problem and even do it for free. It's time. Let us help you help yourself. And in the long run, the more you know, the less you pay. Thank you. All right, that's it.